Imagine spending 5 hours in New York City, Time magazine, with Philip Harara. That's a long time. And we weren't talking about the birds and the bees. He wanted to know what was going on with my life, where I came from. He wanted to understand this Highway Beautification Act from start to finish. He wanted to know. Now keep in mind, he was not ignorant of the subject. Don't worry, Time had their contacts in Washington, D.C. Their bureau chiefs were in Washington, D.C. They were getting inside information, little bits and pieces here and there. But I had become a story that Time magazine owned, Fortune magazine, and they wrote this great article on me that completely opened up the world to me and gave me credibility. Life magazine, which I'm not even referenced, had written an article on me and came out here, spent a week with me, and furthermore, they sent the photographers. So all the pictures that were used, all were shot with Life magazine. A guy by the name of Roger, and he was an amazing guy. Now, Philip Harara, I like this guy. He was a very warm personality. Imagine spending 2 hours in a special restaurant on 3rd Avenue that served clams. And we ate clams till we were stuffed with clams. And I loved every minute of it because I'm insanely in love with clams. But he had, the main question was this: Doug, what do you really want in your quest in Washington, D.C.? That was the question. And I was honest. I said, money. And he knew that anybody else who'd ask that question, they wouldn't answer it with money. Money. And the reason I want money is because the founding fathers in the Constitution had written in there that the government cannot take property of any kind for the use of the public good without paying just compensation. It's that simple. And what was happening was the government was stalling. The original bill called for 3, and this, of course, was an authorization bill, which most of them end up in a file forever. But this was an authorization bill, $300 million to start the funding of highway beautification, to pay the sign owners. They were stalling. And one other reason they were stalling is because the previous Secretary of Transportation, Alan S. Boyd, had gone before Congress, when he was asked the question, how are you going to pay for this highway beautification program? How are you going to pay the sign owners? Simple. He said, we're going to pay them by letting them own their signs. It's long enough that the normal depreciation ends up paying for it. Well, Mr. Boyd, how long is that? And he said, 3 years. That's theft. As I am sitting here at 81 years of age, I have a billboard downtown Idaho Falls, Idaho, right now, that was built on the highway system that the government helped to pay for, to implement it. And that billboard has been there since I was 23 years of age and I'm 81 now. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but I can tell you it's over a half a century. And it's paid me money every single month. And so it's been there for longer than 50 years. So he comes along and says 3 years. Any money that the federal government invested on any road, remember that's 220,000 miles of the federal road system, but the interstate system, which up to this point when we were talking, they had already built 30,000 miles. Today it's around 44 up to 50,000 miles. They keep adding to that interstate system. Now, so I said, if I don't stand up and demand that they pay for my sign, that set a precedent. They can take a house and not pay for it. They can take a pig pen and not pay for it. Who knows what they can take? But I'm the only one standing up right now demanding that they pay just compensation. And we want to know now, as sign owners, what they're going to pay. Now, I have a contract, and that contract's with the state of Utah. And it stipulates unequivocally exactly what they have agreed to pay me. Not only individually with the paperwork, but also collectively for all the signs in the state of Utah. Okay. Now, he talked about another couple things. One was this. Tell me about the Highway Trust Fund. What do you know about that, Mr. Snarr? I said, well, really, I don't know a lot about that. Because I've always been under the understanding that the payment for my program is to be paid for from the general fund. The general fund is the normal taxes that businesses and individuals pay. It would come out of that to pay to take for my contract and other contracts that could be entered into. But I admit that the trust fund would be far superior. That's what I would really like. But I've been told that the House Subcommittee on Roads, as well as the main committee on Public Works, would not ever consider ever breaking into that trust fund. So I've never have even spent any time thinking about it. Well, you just drop that with me, that little thought. Well, he did leave me with this. You've come a long ways, but really your fight has just begun. Now, I was curious, what is he going to write? Now, I got this little article here, which is the second time Time Magazine has written on me. And I'm going to just barely read a little bit, but the heading of this article is Cracking the Highway Trust Fund. So he knew more than I did. And he knew more of what was going on pursuant to the trust fund and the position of the administration, which would be Secretary John A. Volpe and the White House, which means President Nixon on this one. This is so big, he'd have to be involved all the way on that. So I was very curious. Now he mentions this about the cracking the Highway Trust Fund. Now, if that's possible, so he says, so here he wrote, John A. Volpe must enjoy confounding his critics. Now, of all the people I've talked to back there, The one that can do the most to further my cause, without question, would be John A. Volpe. But most of them have so many things going on. These secretaries of Treasury and whatever it is, they don't have time to spend a lot of time on just one issue, particularly if it's just a small issue. But my approach to Volpe was, when I presented my case to him, Mr. Volpe, most people during their period of being on the president's cabinet, what they put in motion, they never see realized. It happens after they're gone, it being realized. This one issue, you could see it realized in your term as Secretary of Treasury. And it's a big issue in the context of the whole environmental movement. Well, then it says this in this article, a little ways down. This week, when Volpe presents the Highway Act of 1970 to the House Public Works Committee, he plans to go farther. Now, farther than what? Farther than just a pilot project to remove billboards company by company rather than sign by sign, which was my whole concept. He proposes to open the hitherto untouchable, indeed almost sacrosanct, Federal Highway Trust Fund. The key word, sacrosanct. What does that mean? That means it is most holy. It means it is inviolable. It means that it can't be cracked in the context of this. It's above that. So if any money is going to be used, it has to be used to take these signs down out of the general fund. That's what this says, because that's how most holy that Highway Trust Fund was. When President Eisenhower decided to build an interstate system across this nation, he realized in that Second World War that because of the road system of America and the roads so narrow, they could not move things from one side of the country to the other fast enough. It was way too inferior. They needed to get this Highway Trust Fund going in order to get the money to be able to build an interstate system. He was aware that the Germans had built an Autobahn, and it was big. Hitler did that to get and move traffic fast in Germany. Well, so the Highway Trust Fund came into existence. That's 4 cents on every gallon of gasoline. Now, at the time I was back there, it was bulging. They had over $3.5 billion. Well, how much that is in today's money, you just go at least 10 times that, just sitting there. You're talking about, a $3.5 billion. You're talking about 35 billion at least, 10 times. And it was to only be used for building roads only, nothing else incidental to the highway system. Under any circumstance, no way. Now, the man who set that up in Congress was a man by the name of George Fallon. He was a congressman from the state of Maryland. Now, you remember that congressmen are voted in every 2 years. But he was the chairman of the Public Works Committee. Now, down below that, the subcommittee on roads was Kluczynski. The man behind that smiling face is an empty head. That was what people characterized him, went on and on about that. Okay, now, I go down further. Now Volpe wants to broaden the uses of the fund to include billboard removal for beautification. And boy, that House, who promised me, Kluzinski did, during lunch, with Dick Sullivan, most powerful man, chief counsel for that entire committee, and Audrey Warren at a luncheon, that if I could get Mayor Daley to tell him this all right, if I could get Volpe to agree to support highway beautification, which came about by the Democrats and Volpe a Republican, if I could get the White House to budget the money into the payment of these signs, that on that basis, they would move ahead on a positive way and eventually get the bill onto the floor to vote on yay or nay. I got all three. They knew I could not do that. And looking back, I still don't know how I pulled that off. But the presentation to Volpe in his office, with all those people around me, including Audrey Warren, my enemy, and Dick Sullivan, my enemy, from the House Public Works Committee, right there, observing every word so they could report back how Volpe responded to me. The most important presentation of my life. And Volpe said yes. It was stunning. Now it goes on. Catalyst for Volpe's startling proposal was Douglas T. Snarr. Last year, Snarr became a one-year lobbyist. Snarr's crusade had hardly begun after I accomplished all three of those things, after I had the Senate on my side, after I had the White House on my side, through Chuck Colson, after I had the Department of Transportation on my side, and I surely had the press on my side. So there that House Public Works Committee, particularly the Subcommittee on Roads, they were isolated, but they were holding firm. And all politics is you got to have the votes, and it breaks down to how you divide the pie. It's all about money. Then he goes on to describe me. Idealistic, insistent, resplendent, in purple suits and iguana cowboy boots. This winter, he astonished politicians by convincing John A. Volpe to act. Without Volpe, I was dead. I explained this earlier on in the previous disc.